I feel like fiction writing is a pursuit of truth where you have to give yourself up to whatever the characters are doing and recognize what kind of truth they are searching for, what they believe in, and what's fundamental to them. And it's so weird to say them because like they're a subset of me, right? But there's a truthiness to all those things. And I think a truthiness to writing where you kind of have to just give yourself up and go with the flow of it in general.
The books I'm reading now have seemingly no connection whatsoever to money or economics, but I've arrived at those books through the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I could try to give you a for instance about this. So I'm reading a book. It's just a psychologist named James Hillman, and it's like, he's a Jungian psychologist, basically. So you're going into archetypes and the anima and the animus and all these things. So like things you wouldn't think are related to economics or money. But when you start trying to understand money, you end up trying to understand the human psyche. And if you follow that deep enough, you end up in like Jungian psychology and other esoteric places. I've noticed in my life too, I've always been kind of I don't want to use the term workaholic, but like I grew up as an athlete. And so I think I carried over those values into my adult life. So, you know, being goal oriented, working hard, visualizing, like trying to be disciplined, like high degrees of self-discipline. But I've noticed that Bitcoin is really taking that to another level for me. You can't just say it's Bitcoin. There's also like the factor that you're getting older, the factor of being a father, you know, having more responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm to the point now where it's like work has become my vice in a way. Like literally I just work and work out and read books and I feel great and I feel like productive and accomplished all the time. And I've kind of hit this life flow state where it's like every day I'm doing things that I still have my frustrations and challenges and all that, but like I kind of designed my day to do what I want to do. And then it's also like helping, you know, it's furthering business and hopefully helping people learn more about Bitcoin or learn more about your book, you know, things like this. So like I'm on mission, but I'm also working in a way that feels like play. So that old saying, like, if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. Like, I feel like I'm flirting with that, at least. I don't know if I've completely found it. And that's an interesting thing. It's a weird thing to think about. Like, oh, this inanimate internet protocol thing that has proof of work built into it to, you know, secure its supply, its money supply, somehow is inspiring participants in that network to also try to work harder. Like, does that even make sense? I say yes, but I'm like, okay, now if you try to articulate the causal link there, it's like, what is that? Why is it the proof of work network inspires people to be more proof of work oriented?
I was just going to ask you, because I've always been curious, like what the mechanism of action there is behind why that happens, but it happens across the board, right? Yeah. I think part of the reason I was attracted to the ideas of proof of work and some of those concepts of Bitcoin was just because I also was a workaholic and continue to be. I always kind of used it as an escape from things in my personal life and whatnot. I mentioned Tourette syndrome. That was the flow states and working hard were kind of a way to escape like physical sensations in my body. But because of that experience, I was so quickly attracted to some of the things that Bitcoin did. It just seems to attract the people that are into those things too, which is so interesting because being around Bitcoiners too just like gives back to me in a way that I would not have expected when I first started like learning about this thing.
Yeah, no, that definitely was a big part of it. Not only like, so you do your own Bitcoin research, homework, reading, and you kind of arrive at a conclusion like, oh, this thing's pretty serious. And even that process is not in isolation, right? You're reading the work of other people and you're on social media and you're listening to podcasts. But then to actually go and be in meet space with other Bitcoiners and you get to know these people that are like, they tend to be very eccentric, very entrepreneurial, very ethical, and also very disagreeable. Like we mentioned the Myers-Briggs things earlier, but another thing,
trade openness.
Yeah, they're very low, and I am one of these people. Like trait agreeableness, I'm like a 1 out of 100 or whatever it is, like very low. And so when you see all of these different eccentric people from all these different walks of life that are also hyper disagreeable, not afraid to tell you what they think, all having really strong agreement about one thing, that Bitcoin is like an earth-shattering innovation. My conviction was like deeply reinforced. It's like, okay, it's one thing to think that I figured this thing out and arrived at a conclusion, but when I see separate lines of inquiry in all these people, all these different approaches, but they all, again, consilience, right? They're all pointing to the same conclusion. Then it's like, okay, Bitcoin, end up getting a Bitcoin tattoo, basically. So,
but it's a cult, bro. Like,
yeah.
Like what cult in the world has ever had a cohort of people that just disagree about everything and love to question everything?
Right. Which is again where it's like, it's like the anti-cultish cult, right? It's like it's a cult about, free inquiry and individual sovereignty and mathematics and thermodynamics and, Darwinian self-preservation. There's not this dogma. Man, I'm just already hearing the critics. critics. I'm like, oh yeah, right. There's not a dogma. Like, you guys say Bitcoin, not shitcoin. You say this, not that. There's mantras. The dogma doesn't seem to be there so much. And maybe this is where Bitcoin's different too. It's like it's enacted, right? It's not so much a narrative. It's like, it's obviously it's code written, but what's creating the Schelling point that is Bitcoin are the actions of people around Bitcoin or with Bitcoin. Just because it's action based, it's less dogmatic, I think is what I'm trying to say. So like that link though, I really don't know. It's mysterious to me. I go back to, I forget who wrote it. It's in the Bitcoin Standard where Bitcoin is described as the first digital organism. It pays people to help it proliferate itself. How much effort we put into mining Bitcoin obviously drives the difficulty adjustment. So Bitcoin's constantly adapting the human action so that it maintains, the supply curve to 21 million. And so like there's this interesting features about it that it kind of behaves like a life form. There's a lot of different terms around here. People have used the term hyperobject. The internet itself is another one of these things. It's like, well, where does the internet really end and where do we begin? It's like we're online, we're feeding it information, it's feeding us information. Like we get this symbiotic kind of flow thing going. And so I really don't know, but like maybe if it is, at least in a complex dynamical systems standpoint, if it's an organism, well, then we're just like symbiotically attaching to the organism. So it's like, oh, I downloaded the Bitcoin software into my, thoughts and actions. And so now I'm more proof of work oriented, something like that. But again, it feels like we're just using language to try to describe something that's like outside of language. Yeah.
There's an interesting thing too, where patterns seem to keep happening even as Bitcoin adopts, where I've spent more time on Twitter because of the book launch recently, and the newer group of Bitcoiners, like seeing how they have acted and like seeing their trip down the rabbit hole has been really interesting comparatively to mine. There's similar cycles with like Bitcoin treasury companies and stuff, but I've seen like the Odell, Stay Humble, Sachs Stats. I'm once again seeing just these subgroups of people come back to just these same basic ideals. They did a lot of like the shitcoining thing. They maybe did a lot of the treasury company thing. And now there's a lot of like coming back to the simplicity of just Bitcoin. And it's so interesting how that happens. And it seems like that keeps happening. And there's been multiple phases of that. I anticipate that probably is going to continue too.
Yeah, that's another strong point of consilience, right? It's like the mantras or the actions, patterns of action that people keep coming back to their own independent lines of search keeps bringing you back to the same conclusion. It's like, oh, that conclusion becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Well, I don't know is the answer basically, but it is very interesting and it's a mysterious thing to talk about. There are several other principles that Bitcoin embodies. We would do well to imitate or to try to emulate in some way. And I'll just read through these and, if any of them jump out to you, anything that's shown up in your life, I would love to hear about that. So we mentioned proof of work, but there's also other principles encoded into Bitcoin like radical truth, truth in a lot of senses of the word. There's, the accurate portrayal of reality. It's like, okay, well, this is a money that is actually scarce, like the time and energy that money transmits back and forth, or at least represents.
I mean, you can stop right there. The truth in general, I feel like fiction writing is a pursuit of truth, where you have to give yourself up to whatever the characters are doing and recognize what kind of truth they are searching for, what they believe in, and what's fundamental to them. And it's so weird to say them because like they're a subset of me, right? They're made in my image like we were talking about earlier. But there's a truthiness to all those things. And I think a truthiness to writing where you kind of have to just give yourself up and go with the flow of it in general.
And that's, easier said than done probably, right? Like to be real and to be vulnerable. It's also beyond the creative process, right? There's also in like human relationships, obviously. If you're going to build like a real friendship or a romantic relationship with someone, well, you got to be real, right? How do you actually feel? You have to be vulnerable and all these things. There's the other older sense of the truth. I think it's Heidegger. He talks about aletheia, which is like translates to something like unconcealed or disclosure, unconcealedness. And I think Bitcoin being open source software is almost like an archetype of that, right? Like it's completely unconcealed. That's why there's no bullshit in it. There's no lies. There's no distortion. It's just open source software. It can only do exactly what it says it will do, which is another one of these principles in a way that's very related to radical truth is radical integrity. So humans doing what we say we will do, again, is pretty instrumental in all human activities, right? So we can signal to one another what we actually intend. And the integrity of our words and our deeds becomes a very desirable virtue for people to have. And Bitcoin, again, kind of like perfects this in a way. It's like, oh, you could never be as integral as Bitcoin, but you should aspire to be.